James Cameron is here, or I should say James Cameron is back. He is a director and writer for Avatar. The movie has resonated around the globe. It has become the highest-grossing film of all time. Box office numbers worldwide have surpassed $2 billion. It replaced the second highest-grossing film, which James Cameron also made. That was Titanic. Avatar has received 9 Oscar nominations. It is tied in nomination with Kathryn Bigelow's The Hurt Locker. He and Kathryn were married. They are still friends. This is a contest everybody is somehow obsessed by. If there is a good time to be James Cameron, it has to be now. I am pleased to have him back on this program to talk about this little movie and what it says about the rest of us. Welcome.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be back.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we'll get into all of this again. Let me just talk about, why do you think it is doing so well beyond the technology, beyond the 3D?
Yeah, I think, well, we didn't see this coming. We expected that we were making a commercial film. It had action. It had this whole other world. We kind of knew what worked about the movie. And I think it's actually the sum total of all the elements. It's no one thing. It's not just the 3D, not just the visual effects. I think it's driven a lot by the fact that people are having a strong emotional reaction in the film. I think it's driven a lot by the fact that it's a film for women as much as men, and for families, meaning that parents can take their children, parents can take their parents, grandparents can take their grandkids, and it's that cross-generational thing and transcultural thing that gets you to this kind of stratospheric level. And I'm only saying that because we saw the same thing with Titanic, even though it was a very different film.
Is there any difference in terms of region? Do the audience react differently in China than they do in Spain?
I haven't actually sat through a screening in China, but our results in China are phenomenal. They're off the scale. It'll be the highest grossing film in China. And, so I'm guessing that they're responding in the same way to the universalities of the human experience in the film. I think they're probably, if I have to guess, and what I can tell from the reports I'm getting, they're crying in the same places, and they're cheering in the same places. So they're getting it. There's something in almost the sort of the simplicity of the story seems to transcend cultures very, very easily, and the strength of the visual.
The simplicity of the story is what other people are drawn to. They say this is a classic story.
And it's been criticized for that.
Exactly, that's what I'm getting to.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what's the message here that you, the filmmaker, were trying to say?
Well, it's probably my most personal film in the sense that I can track the inception of this film over a development period of many years, from when I was a kid out in the woods in Canada, where I grew up, catching frogs and snakes and being a kind of hands-on, junior naturalist, through learning to scuba dive and loving the ocean so much, and it's my response to this world, this Pandora right here, this natural beauty and diversity that we have here. And then through the development as a filmmaker, learning the craft, learning the visual effects, learning how to push the envelope and all that. So for me, Avatar is a sum total of all of that. And so I wanted that environmental theme in there. I wanted those kind of spiritual themes in there. The studio, of course, in their way, tried to get me to downpedal that.
Oh, they did?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, sure.
What did they say?
Well, look, it's common, I would say it was common wisdom, at least prior to Avatar, that you didn't do that in a mainstream film.
Don't put political messages in a big film.
Yeah, especially environmental messages. I mean, it was death. If it got out that there was an environmental message to this film, it would cost us 50% of our box office. That would be the classic thinking on it.
So what they did not want you to do, what?
Well, I mean, the request was, is there a way to cut down on this sort of, hippie tree-hugging stuff?
Yes,
I think was the exact quote.
Is that what they said?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, it's a legitimate concern, but that's why I wanted to make the film in the first place. That was the fundamental driver. Because, after Titanic, I didn't have to make another movie if I didn't want to. And I did all these cool expedition
Movies
films.
have been good to Jim.
Yeah, it worked out. And I had other interests, frankly. I was doing exploration.
So what do you hope the movie convinces people about? that the planet is fragile, that
Sure,
somehow,
sure.
you know, if we don't take care of it, it's going to be consumed by our own appetites?
Yeah, I think.
Is that it?
I think that we are in a very precarious position as humans. We're not going to destroy nature. We can't do that. Nature will heal. But our life as the human species will be radically changed. We're going to go through a lot of pain and heartache if we don't acknowledge our kind of stewardship responsibilities to nature. Because we're in a unique position in history that's never existed before, where there's enough of us and there's enough of an impact created by our industrialized society that we're actually changing the world that we live on. And that's never happened before. And we're sort of in the middle of it, so we don't see it happening. And there's this, you know, human nature is such that we believe that if it's worked for several thousand years, it's going to continue to work. But that's not the case. Business as usual isn't going to work.
Here's what the critics say, not those studio bosses. This is Ross Douthat. Avatar is deeply stupid. It is relentlessly stupid. He's taken every left-wing cliche about politics, about religion, the environment, the military, imperialism, big business, Vietnam, George W. Bush, you name it, from a generation's worth of preachy Hollywood movies and crammed them all into a single teeming blockbuster.
Right.
There you go.
Exactly.
That's what you did.
And it must just
every cliche you could find, just pour it on.
It must drive him nuts that people love that so much. You know, and I think that's obviously deeply demeaning to the audience that has found something in the film. And frankly, I think it's an attempt to deflect from the real issue, which is that people are connecting to the message of the film as well as the visuals
and the characters too. I mean, I assume they like the characters, but I mean, here it's the noble savage thing that drives them crazy too.
Yeah,
intellectuals are not intellectual people who have an insight and sense of history, saying this is the noble savage all over again.
Of course it is.
You know?
It's the Rousseau fantasy of the noble savage. But that's why the film works. Look, intellectually, we can know that there is no such creature as someone who lives a perfect, harmonious life in nature. That
in
nature
a perfect place.
Nature in a perfect place. And by the way, it's a very hostile place where they have to hunt for a living and they can be hunted. So there are even different interpretations of what is harmony with nature. Harmony with nature is knowing your place in the food chain and that, in fact, you may be the prey. It's not holding hands singing in a field of daisies, you know. But you know, I think the fact that people respond to the Na'vi, the characters in the film, the tribe in the film, respond to their philosophy of connectedness to the earth and to each other, means that we have that within ourselves.
Yeah, but here's what they were bothered by too. The critics of this message. It is that they have to be rescued by...
that's a different criticism, though.
I know, it's very different, but that's another criticism.
That's the left-wing criticism of the movie.
That's exactly
that it's paternalistic, which is a form of racism.
Somebody from the planet Earth has to come over and rescue the Na'vi from the bad people who want to do in their planet.
You see, I think that they're looking at the film from a kind of a civil rights aspect instead of from a historical perspective. The historical perspective is that when indigenous populations who are at a bow and arrow level are met with technologically superior military forces that have muskets, you know, blunderbusses and ships and horses with armor and so on, which is the history of the colonial period, they lose. If somebody doesn't help them, they lose. It's not a question of them standing up for themselves. They can't do it. And historically that has been the case. So we're not talking about a racial group within an existing population fighting for their rights.
But you're saying the noble savage cannot win alone.
Absolutely not.
That's what you're saying.
Historically, there's only one instance that I know of on this planet where they have actually prevailed and become a legitimate part of the ongoing culture once the Europeans invaded, and that's in New Zealand, where the Maori, because they're tough bastards basically, managed to fight them to a draw and get a decent treaty that they all live by. But here in South America and Central America, they just got subsumed or enslaved or marginalized.
David Brooks in the New York Times.
No, you're lining them up. This is good. Bring it.
Bring it on. Is that
bring it.
It rests on the stereotype that white people are rationalist and technocratic, while colonial victims are spiritual and athletic. It rests on the assumption that non-whites need the white messiah to lead their crusades. It rests on the assumption that illiteracy is the path to grace. It also creates a sort of two-edged cultural imperialism.
Wow.
Natives can either have their history shaped by cruel imperialists or benevolent ones, but either way, they're going to be supporting actors in our journey to self-admiration.
Interesting. Yeah, well, there's a lot
pretty
in that.
hard
I've
there.
already talked about the white messiah
Right.
concept and how I think that's frankly not appropriate. It's not germane to what the movie's doing. I think some of the other stuff there was a little confusing, and I'm hearing it for the first time. But I think that people are
That's
a
a
little
summary
bit,
of what he said.
I think they're a little bit missing the point of how the movie works and how it was intended to work. The way I intended the film to work, and the way I believe it is working, is that when people view the film, they are told initially that the Na'vi are bad, that they're hostile, ferocious, and that they're going to try to kill you. And then you meet them and you find out that, in fact, they're actually pretty fearsome. But as you start to see the world more from their perspective, and our hero goes on this journey of perceptual change, we begin to embrace them more and more. And really, we emerge from the end of the film on the side of the Na'vi, which really means that we've gone 180 degrees and we're looking at ourselves now from the outside. That's what science fiction can do that all the other literary forms can't do. We can actually look at ourselves from the outside through a mirror or a lens of this fantasy allegorical story. So we see ourselves, human culture, human civilization, as nature sees us, as the intruder, as the invader, as that which is threatening. And when people have that within the film, they feel a sense of moral outrage.
So the United States, for example, should see itself as imperialistic,
I think that
as
there are
destroying its own environment, as...
Yes, absolutely. All developed nations are destroying their environment, some to different degrees. And of course, the developing nations are even worse because they don't even have the luxury of being able to protect their environment as they try to scramble up the ladder of development to a stronger economy. If you look at what's happening in China and India, you know, they have
the argument
much
for growth is that we have to change our
we have to change
standard
the
of
way
living.
we grow,
Right.
and we have to change. We have to be able to grow an economy sustainably in a way that we're not doing right now. And we are jeopardizing we're jeopardizing everything on this planet because as things, it's not about nature. Yes, we're gonna hit the planet hard. We're doing it right now, but the effect of that is that there's going to be chaos between nations for food supply, diminishing food supply as populations grow, as the climate. Water is going to be critical.
Yeah.
Aquifers are falling. All of this stuff,
Yeah.
and we're in denial about it all.
Exactly. Everybody that I know who thinks seriously about the future makes that point.
Sure.
Whether it has to do with food, whether it has to do
Energy.
with water, whether it has to do with energy, you know, scarcity becomes a point of political conflict.
That's right, exactly. And it will drive conflict, and it will crash economies, and it will create chaos, and it's going to be a very unpleasant time for us to go through if we don't get a handle on these things right now. To me, the way I look at it, and I've done a tremendous amount of personal research on this, not necessarily as part of Avatar, is that all of the curves seem to converge out 10, 15, 20 years in the future, having to do with population, the way our agricultural resources are stretched to the limit. They're highly dependent on cheap energy, which is going away. We're not replacing it with alternative energy rapidly enough. All of the trends, you know, the falling aquifers, the rising climate, all these trends all converge. And we're not getting a handle on it quickly enough. I mean, look at Copenhagen, which was a bust, you know.
And if we don't,
it's
a seize of our own.
Yeah, and look, the human race is not going to be wiped out. We will adjust. We'll survive. We're a resourceful people, but you know, hundreds of millions of people are going to be displaced. You're going to have refugee situations on a global scale.
So you hope that people who go in will be, I assume, and they are, I assume, will be entertained.
Absolutely, that's number one.
Number one.
Yes,
you know, you are a commercial filmmaker. If anybody
Absolutely.
in the history of cinema has ever been a commercial filmmaker, you are the king.
You had to go there.
I did. It was not pretty, was it?
No.
It was cheap, too, wasn't it?
It was a cheap shot, yeah, but it's okay. I set myself up for it.
Yes, you did.
You know, there's nothing like the Academy Awards for making a fool of yourself in front of 1 billion people.
Well, what is it?
You know?
What did you say at the Golden Globe then?
No, I was
Were
okay
you
at
were
the
okay at the Golden
Globes.
Globe?
Yeah, I spoke a little Na'vi to my cast.
Yes, it was something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you think you want the world, and certainly the developed world, to wake up? Is that
exactly.
what you want to, beyond being entertained by your characters and your story and your technology? You want them to wake up.
Look, I have no illusions about the efficacy of an entertainment motion picture in changing public policy. It's going to be a minor contribution, but here's where I think it can work, and where it hasn't historically worked, but where it can work, which is we've got the facts. We've seen Inconvenient Truth. We've read all the magazine articles. We collectively, as a society, know that there are these issues. But as a society, we're in denial. Well, what is denial but a mental mechanism in response to an emotional reaction, which is fear? Fear of change, fear of an uncertain future, fear for our children, and the fear generates the denial. So I figure you fight an emotion with an emotion. Avatar doesn't teach you facts. It doesn't have one bar graph in it. It's not Inconvenient Truth. But it does create a sense of emotional outrage, and it creates a sense of hopefulness toward the end as good conquers evil.
And could you hope it creates a sense of urgency?
Absolutely. That's right. That's right. And people the message does resonate for them because they recognize it.
When you want a movie to have impact with a message, remember it was a Louis B. Mayer said, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union.
Right, exactly.
You don't buy that, do you?
No, I don't think so. Look, going back to what I said before, I didn't really need to make another film, and I wanted to do something that was personal and that I thought had some thematic value to it. And, so I threw everything I had at getting it, at making it a great piece of entertainment. And that was the 3D and the CG and the creating the world and everything I knew how to do, every trick I knew to get people to come to a theater. And then every trick I knew as a filmmaker to engage them. In terms of the story and the actors and so on, and part of that was telling a story that was simple in an archetypal manner, that located them comfortably, so they could have an emotional reaction.
Here is my point, though. I mean, does everything to have the impact? Does it always have to be white hat, bad hat? Can you make it more nuanced? And if you do, will you lose something, both in terms of commercial value or in terms of political value?
Well, look, we're kind of in uncharted territory with this movie because it's a big $200 million plus dollar production, 4-year production, big mainstream Hollywood picture that is dealing with social, political, cultural, environmental themes. That's in a very narrow category because I can't point to other examples of that. The studios try to stay away from that stuff. They don't want to lose one ticket sale to somebody who might be upset by a message. So they caution away from that. And generally speaking, common wisdom is you don't do that.
And in fact,
you do it in a smaller picture.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's a little bit uncharted territory. So I was just trying, look, every movie's a big experiment, and sometimes they're social experiments. And I was hoping that there was a way to create an emotional reaction and gravitate the public conversation to these topics.
Fair enough. But you did this because this is what you do, is my point. If I was talking about Jim Cameron, I wouldn't say he could have gone off and set up shop on his yacht. That's not who you are.
No,
you are a filmmaker. You are a guy who wants to be in there, and you are running against yourself.
Yeah.
You ran against Titanic in terms of creating another film. You had to make something that was beyond whatever else had gone before. That's the nature of you.
Maybe I'm being charitable.
Not.
I think so. I think that's very accurate. I think maybe I'm being charitable, but I think that filmmakers always run against themselves.
Yeah.
It's
artists run against themselves.
It's pointless to try to compete with other filmmakers because everybody's got a different vision and a different agenda, a different bit of communication that they want to do. But you do run against yourself in the sense that you want to do the job better. You want to learn from what's gone before. You want to beat your personal best.
Right.
And I'm not talking about money. I'm not talking about box office. Because we didn't imagine that we would blow past Titanic like we did, but communicating to a global audience, that I like to do that. I like to engage people in different languages because I'm speaking in cinema, not because I'm speaking in English or in French or whatever else.
You're going to make another one. It'll either be you can write a book about this. Going to be a prequel to this, are you not?
No, well, I'm going
to figure more. Tell us more about how Navi's came into being.
Yeah. I mean, I had planned this novel project for a long time, and I just never had time to finish it before the film came out. And so I'm going to do it in the next few months, assuming I can write a novel. This is a more uncharted territory, but and then we'll continue. To the extent that I can get deals worked out with 20th Century Fox and all that, we'll continue with this world, because it all exists. We have the hard drives that have all the plants and animals and everything all ready to go.
Well, tell me how this in any way is in the same place as Star Wars.
Well, Star Wars was a film that when I was in my early 20s really blew my mind in a couple of ways, because it was a milestone in the creation of new cinematic technique, and in that case they were using motion control systems which didn't really exist before to create these dynamic moving landscapes. And Lucas did so many things that were groundbreaking on that film that it just blew away an audience with the shock of the new and the wonder of brand new characters, new mythology, all that.
Quality of the sound.
Quality of the sound, quality of the just of the image in general. It really elevated fantasy filmmaking to he leapfrogged over a couple of quantum steps. And I always remember that. And the film before that did that for me was 2001: A Space Odyssey, because there's really sort of all science fiction before that film and then everything after. And I think of Star Wars very much the same way. So when we sat down to conceive this project, I said, I want to pull out all the stops. I want to do that. I want to blow people away with something they've never seen before. Now that's a lofty goal and a very difficult goal, because there's been so much improvement in the CG technology over the last 15 years that it's people are just inundated by imagery that they don't understand how it's made. It's all sort of magical. So how do you do that? And it seemed like we had to create a photoreal, seamless, complete world and all the characters and creatures in it, and that's a huge order. Well, we knew that. That was the goal. Mount Everest.
And you made the goal.
And we did.
But you don't measure by commercial success, do you? You measure it by whether this puts you in the pantheon of 2001: Space Odyssey and Star Wars. That's the question.
That remains to be seen. That's a historical analysis.
You can't tell that yet.
That gets, well, look, I think we're definitely.
That's what you were shooting for.
Yeah, we're blowing people away.
In your judgment, did you make it? Is that where you wanted to go? You want to be up there on that level of filmmaking. Stanley Kubrick, George Lucas, James Cameron.
Is it here? Is it there? I don't know. What I know is
it's in the ballpark.
It's in the ballpark because relative to the films that have come out in the last few years, people seem to be getting a more of a sense of a profound experience out of this, and whether that comes from the 3D or from the imagery, the dreamlike quality of the film, what I call the lucid dream aspect of it, whether it's the story, whether it's all those things. The very first question you asked me was, what's contributing to the success?
Exactly.
How do you account for it? And my answer was, it's all of those things combined. Because I don't think you fight the battle on or the war on one front. I think you fight it on as many fronts as you can to create a kind of an all-consuming experience.
Tell me what's the most important thing you know about storytelling?
You have to find a key to the heart of the audience, which means you have to find universals of human experience and then express them in exotic new ways. So you've got to find something that people recognize. Simple as boy meets girl on a ship, which is going to sink. But the knowledge that it's going to sink was a critical part of that storytelling. Because otherwise you had 2 hours of women in corsets and funny hats before anything happened, before the ship even hit the iceberg. But if you know it's sinking, you hang around for all that. You see what I mean? So that was a part of the storytelling. But I think it's always about the characters and about how those characters express something that the audience is feeling. So it has to have some universality to it, having to do with relationships, whether it's parent-child, male-female, whatever it is. And then you have to take them on a journey. And then you have to make it excruciating somehow. Excruciating.
They have to be challenged, they have to be in danger, they have to be in pain, they have to be
fear,
triumphant,
tension,
and triumphant.
And triumph, yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That's an element of it, some form of triumph.
Some form of triumph, exactly.
Whether it's our values or a victory, something.
Yeah, in the case of Titanic, everybody died, including at the very end of the film, the main character, but she lived a life that she had learned. There was an energy transfer from one character to another, which I also think is a fundamental of a love story, that there is some flow of energy from one character to the other. And so I applied that rule set at a very abstract level to Avatar, because it's a very different story, obviously, different setting, different characters, different goals to the story and to the relationships. But I think you can step back to a very abstract level of general principles, and if you apply those principles, it'll work.
What do you make of this competition between you and Kathryn Bigelow? Two very different people who married, but more than that, two people who share this sense of wanting to be good filmmakers.
Yeah. I think we're really not that different in so many ways, and we know that about each other, that we're both dedicated to the craft, and for both of us it's very much about the work and about a total consuming passion for filmmaking. And I think that's what drew us together, is each respected the other's passion and craft and so on. Plus, she was gorgeous. Is gorgeous.
She is that.
But it's not real. In our minds, it's not a competition. That's a narrative that's imposed by others, because it makes a good story. We're so celebratory of each other's work, and we've remained. I produced two of her films, one of which I wrote and produced.
Right.
Wrote it with Jay Cox.
Right.
After we were divorced, and so we've worked together, and we've been supportive colleagues. She saw Avatar 5 times at different stages of its development, from very crude stage.
You would go show it to her and say, "Tell me what you think."
Yeah, she'd come over and tirelessly come over, watch the film. This is over a period of 6 or 8 months, and give me notes, and even Mark Bohl, who wrote Hurt Locker, came and gave them very good notes, very helpful notes. And they had shared Hurt Locker with me earlier on,
right.
And my note was very simple: don't change a damn thing. Because they showed it to me fairly late in the process, because I had been shooting,
right.
And I said, don't change a damn thing, this thing is great. And they were, of course, very nervous.
Why is it so great, you think?
I think just because it's consummately good filmmaking. Excuse me. Consummately good filmmaking. I mean, you are in those guys' shoes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're there. I mean, I've been at screenings and watched people literally sit on the edge of their seat. Literally. I mean, you hear that expression all the time. Literally sit forward for the entire movie, hands clenched, like this. It's that tight. It's that taut, And for her to, she's outgunned the guys, definitely. And of course, her
you're not surprised by that.
Not at all, because she's always done that. But it's the recognition, finally the recognition catching up with the scope of her talent.
So if someone sitting there says, "Look, I'm going to give it to Cameron Best Picture, but Bigelow Best Director,"
that would be a fantasy. That would be my fantasy outcome. Absolutely.
That would be what you'd like to see.
That's the best possible outcome, because I know how hard my team worked and how proud they would be of that accolade. You know what I mean? Look, for myself, I've already got an Oscar. I've got a couple of them, and I respect the whole institution of the Academy Awards, because it's the pinnacle of achievement in my chosen profession. But I don't really need another one. But to be honored, have the team honored, and for their accomplishment, that would mean so much to them. And I think that would be the fantasy outcome in all of this.
So you're saying to the voters, please take a look at my team and go for us as Best Picture, but go for Kathryn Bigelow for Best Director.
I mean, all I can say is that would make me very happy. If that, I don't want to try to
than if it was Best Director for James Cameron.
Honestly, yes.
I believe you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I just think she's worked so hard for so long, and there's something very irresistible about the idea of a woman finally being anointed in that role. And it's ridiculously long overdue, and she, of course, would reject that being a woman should have anything to do with it, and that's what's cool about it.
Yes. We'll see. Thank you for coming. I mean, I love film, as you know, and for you to come and talk about it in an interesting way.
Well, it's always a pleasure, because we get a chance to talk about cool stuff. And you were well prepared. You had every negative review you could find. You sent your people out.
Didn't do that.
That's all right. It's good. It was like a good singles tennis match. I like that.
Well, I like tennis. James Cameron, the director and writer of Avatar, a film that's gotten all the commercial success you could ever hope, and at the same time critical success because of its 9 nominations for the Academy Award and what it's already won in other awards that have already been granted. What can you say? The people have spoken. Back in a moment. Stay with us.